Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back to Washington Journal. I'm joined now by Tom Fitton. He's the president of Judicial Watch. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So Hunter Biden will be appearing in a Delaware court today. What exactly are the crimes that he is being charged with, and what will you be watching?
Well, based on my memory, there are misdemeanor charges related to failure to file taxes in recent years. There's been talk of this gun charge, but I don't think he's being charged there. There's going to be a diversion there, so there'll be no criminal charges related to his lying on the forms, federal forms related to his drug use, which you're supposed to disclose when you're purchasing a gun on the federal form. And he didn't do that, and rather than charging him with a crime, they're charitably diverting him to another program there, which has nothing to do with the, criminal sanctions. So, the big test here, or the controversy, is whether there were felonies that were ignored by this Justice Department, whether there was obstruction of information that could have impacted the way the Justice Department pursued and handled these crimes. And I don't know what the court's going to do with all of that. And now there's this new controversy about whether Hunter's lawyers misled the clerk to try to get information taken down that they didn't like, that Republican congressman had filed from the House Ways and Means Committee, highlighting the corruption and the obstruction of justice, it looks like, based on IRS whistleblower testimony, that may have subverted this process that led to this plea agreement.
We'll get to all that, but I want to remind our viewers that if you'd like to call in, make a comment, we're going to take your calls here shortly. The lines are Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. The USA Today has an article that says this: did Hunter Biden get a sweetheart deal? How these cases play out with other defendants. What do you think of that? Was it a sweetheart deal?
Of course it was a sweetheart deal.
Why?
I mean, because it's one thing to say there are these universe of charges, and this is what he's pleading out to. It's another thing to ignore the criminality and pretend that the plea has anything to do with the broader issue. You have information, for instance, that the FBI had, that there was $10 million in bribes going to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden collectively. Was that an issue when they were pleading this out? FARA registration, Foreign Agents Registration Act, conspiracy, money laundering, the sorts of crimes that seemingly would be raised given all the evidence been coming out through Congress and whistleblowers and such. And if none of that has been pursued, that's obviously a sweetheart deal. If there's credible information that you murdered someone, and the government comes in and gives you a plea for jaywalking, that by definition is a sweetheart deal.
So sticking with those tax misdemeanors, take a look at this. This is Maggie Abdu Gomez. She's a tax attorney, former IRS lawyer. She says this: as an attorney who has spent her entire career, nearly 40 years, working as an attorney for the IRS and then defending taxpayers before the IRS, I can tell you that I have numerous clients who owe the IRS substantial sums of taxes and are not prosecuted. What do you think of that? What's your response?
Well, that's not responsive to the issue here. Did the Justice Department, for instance, allow tax years to go uncharged because they just sat on the charges, and meaning the tax years in which the Burisma bribe money came in, alleged, right? Were they required to seek felonies under DOJ standards? That's been the allegation by whistleblowers and critics of this plea deal. Obviously, there are cases where people owe back taxes and they're not charged. But this isn't one of these cases. And are the charges commensurate with what we know publicly about the crimes that he did? And what needs to be grappled with is that we have sworn testimony before Congress that the Justice Department interfered to stop investigations related to these charges of Joe Biden, his family, and frankly to kind of curtail the depth and breadth of the charges against Hunter.
Following the plea deal, your organization, Judicial Watch, said this, quote, Congress now has no choice but to initiate an immediate impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden and Merrick Garland. On what grounds?
Well, we've been saying Joe Biden for some time. I guess Merrick Garland may be a little bit new. Well, the Justice Department is going to investigate these issues. I mean, it can't be trusted to. There's no evidence that they will. And the impeachment of Joe Biden relates to the evidence of criminality from his days as vice president. He continues to lie about his being compromised because of the monies that his family and he seemingly benefited from. And we have ongoing obstruction by the Justice Department. The evidence is strong that there was obstruction of justice by the Garland Justice Department in the investigations of Joe Biden. And, you know, what I'd advocate for is an impeachment inquiry. You know, are these issues important enough to warrant impeachment and or removal from the presidency of the United States of Joe Biden? And certainly, yes. So this investigation should be transformed into an impeachment inquiry, and I'm hoping that Speaker McCarthy is finally signing on to that way of proceeding. Does it mean it's going to result in impeachment of Joe Biden? I don't know, but you're never going to get to that impeachment question if you don't begin an inquiry.
ABC News is reporting this. Former Hunter Biden associate to sit for closed-door testimony with the House Oversight Committee. This is Devon Archer. Can you tell us who that is, and why is this going to be a closed-door hearing? Why won't it be in public?
Well, that's a fair question. I like to have these go on in public, and of course, Congress and investigators like to get witnesses behind.
And C-SPAN does too.
Right, behind closed doors before they bring them out for testimony. But Devon Archer is a longtime business partner of Hunter Biden, and I would submit indirectly Joe Biden. And he's prepared to testify, according to reports, that Joe Biden was repeatedly put on the phone with Hunter's business partners. So you have this other witness, Tony Bobulinski, who your listeners and viewers may recall, and he was a partner of the Bidens as well, but he came in a little bit late after Joe Biden left the vice presidency. Devon Archer goes back to the beginning with the Bidens, so he was heavily involved and directly involved in many of these business deals that are, we would argue, should be the subject of criminal investigation. And if he testifies that Joe Biden was directly involved in Hunter Biden's business, again, you know, whether I want impeachment or not, or an inquiry or not, I don't see how it's avoidable.
So Tom, if you were on that committee, what would you ask Devon Archer? What do you want to know from him?
What was the involvement of Joe Biden in these business arrangements, and why were you getting this money? Why were these foreign interests giving you this money? What did Burisma want in return? What did the Chinese energy company want in return? What did the Romanians want in return? And did you see the vice president's office as a kind of a selling point? And what was Joe Biden's role in that? And was Joe benefiting from these monies that you were getting through these companies? What was your understanding there? I mean, we have testimony, or at least evidence in this FBI document, this 1023, that the CEO of Burisma gave them money in exchange for intervention to protect his company from being investigated and prosecuted by Ukrainian prosecutors. And, you know, I don't think it's any coincidence that the prosecutor responsible for that was shut down by Joe Biden's own admission through his intervention.
There's another testimony coming up. This is now David Weiss, who's the U.S. attorney in Delaware investigating Hunter Biden. He has offered to testify before Congress in the fall. What would you be looking for in that testimony?
Well, the dispute with Weiss is a U.S. attorney appointed by Trump, but in fact he's a creature of the Democratic Party up in Delaware. He was approved by the 2 Democratic senators. That's the way U.S. attorneys are appointed in this country. The state senators approve the appointment, more or less. And, you know, Weiss supposedly had this, unreviewable authority given to him by Garland to do anything he wanted in terms of prosecutions of Hunter Biden and related crimes. And according to these IRS whistleblowers who were in the room with Weiss, at least in one key meeting, he didn't have that ultimate authority. So Congress was misled, at least according to the testimony of Garland. And, you know, Weiss has kind of changed his story about what type of authority he had. And if he didn't have the authority, who was making the decisions not to prosecute Hunter Biden on these tax charges more aggressively?
And we'll have that under oath. So
yes,
presumably we'll know.
But in the fall, I don't know what that means. If I were Congress, I'd cancel the recess and get to work on questioning these folks yesterday.
All right, let's talk to callers now. Peter is in New York, Republican. Good morning, Peter.
Yeah, good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
I watched the whole hearing of the whistleblowers, and it was obvious that the Democrats were not interested in finding out what actually happened. Both gentlemen, Mr. Spackley and the other gentleman, both testified that they were obstructed from their investigation into Hunter Biden's activities, and particularly they said in looking into Joe Biden, they were told specifically don't ask any questions about Dad or the big guy or any of that. And as far as the hearing today with Hunter Biden, most lawyers that I heard said that more than likely this judge is going to accept a plea bargain that was negotiated for Hunter, and that'll be the end of it. So basically, being the Republicans only control the House of Representatives, they may be able to impeach Hunter, but impeach Joe Biden, but it'll never. They got to get 68 votes in the Senate to remove him, and that's just not going to happen. So the best case scenario is that all the truth comes out. The American people see exactly what they were doing. And hopefully in the 2024 election, even though I don't personally believe that Joe Biden will be the candidate, I believe that he will announce by next summer that he's not running and he'll be out of the picture. And even if they got a conviction of Hunter, Joe Biden would pardon him. So, again, this is all kabuki theater, but it's intended to give the American people all the information, and they should have impeachment hearings. This way, all the truth comes out about exactly how corrupt the Biden family actually is.
All right, Peter. Go ahead, Tom.
I mean, it was a good analysis. I may have a point or two at the margins, but that's certainly a persuasive way of thinking about how things will turn out.
Evan is a Democrat in Florida. Good morning.
Good morning. I've just seen that Hunter Biden's been going to be charged, or he's pleading guilty, and he has at least 2 charges. What do you expect if he were to do any jail time? And also,
all right, we're going to move on. Let's go to Jason in Marietta, Pennsylvania, Independent.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hello, Tom. I just wanted to give you my deepest thanks for convincing Donald Trump to ignore the advice of his lawyers, which is a big reason why he's in as much trouble as he is now. So thank you so much for doing that, and have a good day, y'all.
Do you know what he's talking about? Ignoring
Well,
the
there's
advice?
all this controversy, and all these leftists pretend to presume that they know what, quote, advice I gave to Donald Trump on the handling of presidential records. But
what advice did you give him?
well, I told the grand jury what my views were on the issue, and my general views have been the Presidential Records Act gives him the ultimate discretion here. And the fact is he cooperated with the investigation. He turned over subpoenaed records. I know there's an argument about whether he turned over all the subpoenaed records and whether there was obstruction there, but I didn't see any evidence of it. But the fact that he was harassed and abused over these presidential records, to me, is just an abuse of power by the Justice Department. And as far as I'm concerned, he can't fight strong enough to assert his rights under law there.
So what do you think of the timing? That's going to come up in May. The judge has set that for May 20th. Right. So what do you think of that? I mean, regarding the election?
Well, I think obviously the charging was election interference, and I think the court should be very sensitive about having the judiciary be cornered into engaging and managing a presidential candidate during the middle of a primary and a general election. I think it's extraordinary. Is it possible it takes place in May? Certainly, she scheduled it, but there's a lot of reasons for it to be pushed beyond the election. And I suspect that will ultimately happen.
All right. Francisco, Miami, Florida, Republican. Good morning.
Yes, I'm a Republican, and I just want to say something. Everything that's been happening in Washington has been the Democrats' fault. From Clinton, the Obama administration, and Biden and Hunter Biden. Everybody should be put in jail. And Biden should be impeached, and Hunter Biden should be impeached, and Majorca should be impeached. This Democrat administration are communist controlled. Everything. They change all kinds of laws. Can you believe now about the no prayers in schools, no prayers in jobs, no prayers anywhere? They got God in last place, and they got everything else in first place. And I don't like that. You know, when I came to this country, there were prayers in schools.
Well, you know, there's a lot of significant Democrat corruption. My concern is that virtually all of it is taking place with the acquiescence or, you know, hapless response by Republicans and, frankly, honest Democrats who know better. So all this abuse we have of Donald Trump by the Justice Department is being fully funded by the Republicans. There's not a dollar that falls from the sky in Washington, D.C. that isn't approved by Congress, more or less, certainly when it comes to Justice Department. So if Republicans don't like what the Justice Department and the FBI are doing, then they should defund the specifics of what they're doing or the agency more generally, or the agencies more generally.
We've got a question for you that was sent to us from Greg in Arlington, Texas via text. He says this: please ask Mr. Fitton if he continues to support the idea that Biden did not win the election, his support for the Stop the Steal and the January 6th insurrection and attack on the Capitol. Also, has he been canned to testify to the grand jury? Has he been called to testify to the grand jury?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I was harassed by the Justice Department and asked to testify to the grand jury, and they did ask me about the election disputes, and it was a 3-hour debate about electors and such. And I remember thinking at the time, why am I being asked about First Amendment protected activity before a federal grand jury? And as I've said in other formats, it was like being on MSNBC for 3 hours. It was just political argument with these federal prosecutors that are supposed to be looking for crimes, not looking to put people in jail based on policy disagreements. And I think the danger of what we're facing now, because it's likely that Trump is going to be indicted somehow related to his disputing the election, is that the new rule will be if you dispute a presidential election, certainly one that the left supports, they're going to jail you.
Well, I guess this gentleman is asking you if you still support the idea that Biden did not win the election.
Oh, I think there's a dispute who was the actual winner versus who the practical winner was. Obviously, Biden is the president of the United States. I think President Trump had the votes to win the election on Election Day, and that result was changed as a result of unprecedented, dubious counting of ballots that occurred after Election Day, and that's never happened before in American history. And we see time and time again that there were interventions by the Justice Department, the FBI, and big tech to try to rig the system in a way that calls the outcome of the election into dispute. Now, what is the practical impact of that is that, you know, we're going to have continued disputes about elections in the future, about how they should be run and whether the government should intervene to try to put their thumb on the scales one way or the other. But the idea that you would jail someone for saying what I said or pursuing these issues under state, federal, and constitutional law, to me, is tyrannical.
All right, let's talk to Angela next. She's a Democrat in Conowingo, Maryland. Good morning.
Oh, hello. A couple points. Number one, even if Biden did get money from his son, I don't think that's illegal unless he actually did something, used his influence to get that money. And if you're going to use Burisma as the example, you're way off base, buddy, because all the fact checkers out there, and even the first day of Trump's impeachment hearing, proved that was not Joe Biden's doing. It was the Department of the State. It was our government and European governments because there was corruption in Ukraine. at the time. And just fact check, Biden firing the prosecutor had nothing to do with his son. Nothing at all.
I mean, but reality is the fact check here. And we have an FBI document and other evidence that shows that the effort by Joe Biden personally to shut down Shokin's investigations by having him fired was the result of a bribe. Now, the idea that, well, the State Department didn't like Shokin and others didn't like Shokin, well, that may be the case, but it doesn't describe the basis for Joe Biden's intervention here and his obsession with getting Shokin fired.
And Chris is in California, independent. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. I have two short points. The first one is, so a lot of people do drugs. Hunter Biden should have paid his taxes. I have no problem saying that, but I've always wondered, when do conservatives, Republicans, whatever, look in the mirror and say, do we look really obsessive just pursuing this one guy with however much of, taxpayer resources and all that, just to pursue one person that's really doing nothing different than what all sorts of people do? And then second point.
Well, hold on a second. I mean, do all sorts of other people use their father, who is the vice president, to get millions of dollars from foreign companies? I mean, we have evidence that he was bribed to get I mean, what strikes me about some of the callers here is they say things that have no basis in reality, and because it's a political talking point for their side of the political aisle. And I would just encourage both sides of the aisle to try to figure out what the actual truth is and say, well, and what I'm saying, I understand others who I like say it, but is it actually true? And what we're hearing too much from Democrats is they're ignoring all the significant evidence of significant government corruption by Joe Biden involving not only Hunter but other family members, money laundering, evidence produced by Mr. Comer of the Oversight Committee. We have this FBI document showing Burisma CEO admitting to bribing him. There's nothing normal about this. This isn't just anyone's son who just got caught up because he happens to be the president's son. This is interlinked and intertwined inexorably with Joe Biden.
And Chris, did you say you had another point?
Yeah, that was the conspiracy theory. My second point was...
Well, what's the conspiracy theory about it? What documents that I described are a conspiracy theory?
My second question was just that...
I mean, you don't want to deal with the truth, sir. You don't want to deal with the truth.
You said Dominion and Smartmatic voting machines were unreliable. That was what came out of your mouth. And the caller was asking...
What did I say? What did I say?
Of what has happened with those two companies, are you still willing to imply that the reason why you have doubts about the election has to do with what you said 2 years ago?
The voting machines.
The voting machines.
I mean, what did I say 2 years ago about the voting machines?
That they were unreliable. And there was a court case about that.
I don't recall saying they were unreliable. I do recall saying there were questions about how those votes were handled and whether those voting machines were as secure as they should have been and could have been given our reliance on them.
Which means that they're unreliable.
All of that, of course, had been said by Democrats within 2 years of the 2020 election, but that changes depending on the outcome. Most folks involved in the voting area don't like the idea of internet voting. They never really liked it. They never thought it was secure enough. And so they're concerned that any of these machines potentially interface with the internet or were more easily accessible to all sorts of people, even outside the internet, meaning people dealing with them directly, raise questions about how secure our elections should be. And I said specifically what my issues are. They were counting votes that shouldn't have been counted after the election, and that changed the result.
Counting votes that shouldn't have been counted, meaning?
Federal law requires the President of the United States, the electors, to be chosen on Election Day, not 6 days after the election.
Rick is a Republican in Los Angeles. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, we're wasting a lot of time talking about the voting machines. The election was stolen by the deep state, the mainstream media, the FBI, and all this other election interference. Okay, now the reason why I called was, one caller called and said this is a kabuki theater. Okay, if they get to keep the millions of dollars that they got from bribe money, what difference does everything else make? Those accounts need to be shut down, seized, and they need to go to. If they're not going to jail, why should they get to keep the money?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of frustration by the American people that, all this information is coming out and there's no accountability about it or for it. And I think that's a challenge for Republicans, too. They have all these hearings, and we're going to have callers like this and many other voters say, well, why are we having these hearings if nothing's done about it? And, maybe that's why McCarthy is beginning to finally sign on potentially to an impeachment inquiry. I don't know whether that's going to go anywhere or not. My concern is they promised contempt, practically speaking, for Director Wray over his refusal to produce this document. As best I could tell, he still refused to produce the document as the subpoena required, and contempt wasn't pursued. So, threats are nice, but follow through is better.
And Tom, do you agree with Republican efforts to expunge the impeachments of Donald Trump?
Oh, I think those impeachments were terribly corrupt. So anything they can do within their powers to correct the record and correct and mitigate that miscarriage of justice would be good.
All right, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Up next on Washington Journal, freshman Democratic Congressman Sri